Right, so imagine this. Just picture a lake, a really huge still lake. Like you can just feel the quietness, the serenity, and like there's not a single ripple, on the surface. And then boom, a stone, a single stone. It just breaks that stillness, right, and sends all these rings of energy, these ripples out, out, out. It changes the whole lake in an instant. And that image, right, that idea that one small thing can create a really massive shift. It's a powerful metaphor, and it's actually at the core of Buddhist philosophy. But what might surprise you is how relevant this ancient way of thinking can be, for achieving success right here, right now in our lives.
Yeah. That's a really great image to start with. And you're spot on. It's about looking at these big ideas in Buddhism, but in a way that connects them to your everyday life, and specifically how they can help you grow as a person and find success. And we've been looking at some incredible material that does exactly that. It takes these sometimes pretty abstract philosophical concepts and makes them really practical.
Yeah, exactly. This isn't about getting lost in ancient texts or anything like that. What really struck me, in going through these sources is that there are actionable insights here.
Yeah.
Real tools you can use to get over obstacles, right? To find that spark of innovation that we're all looking for, and ultimately, like a deep sense of fulfillment that lasts. So, whether someone's listening to this, thinking about a career change, or they're building something new from scratch, or maybe they're just feeling stuck, this is for them. We want to give them a fresh perspective, like a shortcut to understanding some really powerful ideas, without getting bogged down.
And we're going to break it down into 3 key areas, right? First, we'll dive into this idea of emptiness. And it's not what you might think. We're talking about the potential that comes when you learn to let go.
Right.
Then we're going to explore what's called the path of the enlightened. And we'll focus on how mindfulness and that intentionality can actually be really practical tools, bridging that ancient wisdom with the way you live your life now. And lastly, we'll look at the art of letting go. And this might sound a little counterintuitive, but the idea here is that detaching from things can actually be a huge driver of true success for you.
Okay, I'm really intrigued already. So let's start with this first part, the power of emptiness. Now, I think when a lot of people hear that, emptiness, especially, in the West, they think of like a lack of something, right? A void.
Yeah.
But the sources we've been looking at, they paint a really different picture, right? They talk about this concept called shunyata. So can you unpack that for us a little? What does it actually mean within Buddhist philosophy?
Yeah, so shunyata, emptiness. What's fascinating here is it's not really about this void or this lack. It's more about potential. Think about that image of the lake again, right? Before you throw the stone in, it's empty of those ripples. But that emptiness is what allows for all of those ripples to appear, right? Like in that stillness, the lake has the potential for infinite change. In the same way, if your mind is like uncluttered, free of those preconceptions and fears and attachments, it becomes the space where new things can arise, new ideas, growth. It's about seeing that inherent possibility that exists when you just loosen that grip on your thoughts.
That makes a lot of sense. And the material actually highlights some really great examples of people who seem to tap into this, maybe without even realizing it, right? Like Steve Jobs, for example, talks about his connection to Zen Buddhism. So how did that manifest in his life and his work?
Well, one of the most insightful things about Steve Jobs is that there's a clear link between his Zen practices, that daily meditation, his focus on mindfulness, and, the minimalist aesthetic that Apple is known for. And that's more than just design, right? It seems to reflect this deeper understanding, maybe subconscious, that less is more. Like, think about it. Jobs' meditation practice probably led him to ruthlessly cut out anything from his products that wasn't essential. He was applying shunyata, emptiness, in design. By stripping away distractions, both personally and in the things he created, he unlocked a level of clarity and innovation that was truly unique.
Totally. And the material also looks at Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater Associates, and he's really known for his practice of transcendental meditation, which also has roots in Eastern traditions. What's the big takeaway there?
Well, Dalio emphasizes that success isn't just about this constant drive or, just accumulating wealth. He actually says that a lot of his ability to deal with the intense world of finance comes from his meditation practice. It helps him stay calm, make better decisions, and most importantly, see things from multiple angles.
Right.
For Dalio, true success is about having wisdom and keeping things in balance. And that comes from embracing where you are in the moment and letting go of that ego.
So what we're seeing here is that, this idea of emptiness, it isn't just theoretical, right? It actually has a really practical impact on how we approach our own ambitions. And the text really emphasizes that true success It starts inside each of us. It starts with that ability to clear your mind, to let go of those limiting beliefs.
And this brings up a really important question, I think. If you're always focusing on external validation or those material gains, are you missing something fundamental? The material argues that lasting fulfillment, real fulfillment, can only come when you have that inner harmony. If you're a mess inside, no amount of external success will truly satisfy you.
And that leads to this really thought-provoking question that the text poses. It asks, what if everything you need to be successful is already within you? It talks about how fear and doubt and even your attachment to a specific outcome, those things can actually hold you back.
Yeah.
They become like that frozen lake, preventing the flow of inspiration, creativity.
Right. It's like when your mind is so cluttered with those negative emotions and expectations, you can't see the opportunities that might be right in front of you. Like it's like trying to see through a thick fog, But when you have that inner stillness, when you create that space, you allow for ideas to flow, for problems to be solved more naturally and intuitively.
The text, it actually uses a really nice metaphor here. It talks about a garden. Your dreams and aspirations, they're like seeds.
Yeah.
Right? And for them to actually grow, to flourish, they need the right internal environment. They need fertile soil, sunshine, rain, and those things represent things like positivity, patience, and believing in yourself.
Right. And what's really interesting here is that it emphasizes that this is your responsibility. Successful people, according to this, they don't just sit around and wait for perfect conditions. They actively work on creating that positive internal environment. They cultivate clarity, purpose, resilience. They even see those challenges, the setbacks, not as roadblocks, but as chances to learn and grow, like how a garden actually needs a storm sometimes to really thrive.
Okay, so for someone listening to this, right, and they're thinking, okay, this all sounds good, but how do I actually do this? How do I apply this to my life? The text has a couple of suggestions, like starting with self-reflection. What kind of questions, should we be asking ourselves?
Well, it encourages you to look inward, to gently ask yourself, what am I clinging to right now? What fears, what need for control, what attachments to outcomes might be weighing me down, might be clouding my judgment. And the real key here is to be kind to yourself during this process. Don't judge yourself. Just acknowledging those things is the first step to loosening their grip.
And then it also talks about mindfulness meditation, even if it's just for a few minutes a day. So how can that help in creating this inner space?
What mindfulness meditation does, even in short bursts, is it helps you become more aware by paying attention to your breath, noticing your thoughts and feelings without getting swept away by them. You start to see your patterns, you see your triggers, your habitual ways of reacting. And this awareness, it gives you that space to choose how you respond, to make decisions that are actually aligned with your values and your goals, not just reacting automatically.
Okay, so the big takeaway from this first part seems to be that success at its core, it's not about chasing external things, right? It's about uncovering and nurturing something that's already there within you. It's like that lake, that emptiness holds the potential for all those ripples, and you already have everything you need for change and growth. It's really about being willing to embrace that emptiness and trust the process.
Yeah. And it comes down to that question the material asks, are you ready to let go of the things that aren't serving you anymore? Are you willing to step into those possibilities that open up when you create that inner space?
Okay, so moving on to part 2, the path of the enlightened. The discussion shifts a bit here to the origins of Buddhism and Siddhartha Gautama's, journey. It's interesting how, someone who seemingly had everything, materially speaking, still felt this emptiness.
Well, what's really powerful about the Buddha story, I think, is that it shows us that everyone searches for meaning. It's universal, even beyond just material comfort. His decision to leave his very privileged life and try to understand suffering, it led him to create this framework, the Noble Eightfold Path. And the material argues that this path isn't just for, spiritual people. It can be a guide for anyone looking for a more fulfilling life.
And within that path, the text focuses on this idea of right effort, or samavayama. So how does that apply to, modern life and those of us who are trying to achieve our goals?
Right. Effort. At its core, it's about being really intentional with your energy, being mindful of how you're spending your time, your attention. It's about choosing to focus on positive qualities, choosing growth, choosing harmony. And at the same time, avoiding things that distract you, things that could lead to, negativity or harm. It's about being intentional in how you interact with the world, how you approach your goals. It's about choice.
And the text breaks this down into some really, really practical applications. Like the first one is simply starting your day with intention, asking yourself, what am I striving for today? And it seems almost too simple, right? But what's the power in that?
Well, it's easy to get lost in those day-to-day tasks, and to forget about the bigger picture. But when you take a moment each morning to set an intention, you're giving yourself a direction for the day. It helps you to see the difference between just being busy and actually making progress. It gives you this sense of focus, this sense of purpose that guides your actions throughout the day.
Right. Makes sense. Another application the text talks about is this idea of mindfulness through single tasking.
Yeah.
And, we live in this world where multitasking is often seen as a good thing, right? A skill. But the text, it actually suggests that single tasking is much better for your well-being and your productivity.
Yeah, and the research backs this up. Even though you might feel like you're getting more done by juggling a bunch of things at once, you're often actually less efficient. It increases your stress levels, and it can actually lower the quality of your work. Single tasking, on the other hand, it's about giving your full attention to one thing at a time. And this trains your brain to stay present. And that not only helps with productivity, it can also boost creativity. You become more engaged with what you're doing.
Interesting. And this idea of impermanence, that's such a key concept in Buddhism, and it comes up here, but it's presented as an opportunity, not something to be afraid of. So how can that shift in perspective be helpful, for someone who is striving for success?
Embracing impermanence, it frees you from being so rigid in your expectations. It frees you from the fear of change. Everything is constantly in flux. Successes are temporary and failures are temporary. When you really get that, when you understand that, you become less attached to specific outcomes, and you become more willing to take risks, to try new things, to adapt when things don't go as planned. Like, remember the example of Jeff Bezos. His willingness to experiment, to not be afraid to fail, that illustrates this mindset perfectly. It's about seeing change not as this threat, but as a natural part of a journey.
Right. The text even shares a story about a career setback, and how understanding impermanence helps someone find a new path, new determination.
Yeah.
It really shows how these philosophical ideas can be, tools for navigating those ups and downs that we all experience.
Absolutely. Those tough moments, they can feel like the end of the world. But understanding impermanence reminds you that they're just transitions. You're not defined by them. By not clinging to the past or dreading the future, you can find the strength to move on. And you might even discover some amazing possibilities that you never expected.
Totally. And the text provides some practical ways to integrate these ideas, like having a morning routine that includes meditation or journaling. What's the value in that?
Well, even dedicating just a few minutes to reflection or gratitude, or even just visualizing your day, it can set a really positive tone. It's a chance to connect with yourself before the day gets crazy, allowing you to approach challenges with a clear mind and a more grounded perspective.
Makes sense. And it also talks about doing these little midday awareness checks and practicing metta, loving kindness meditation. How do those fit into this path of enlightened effort?
So those midday awareness checks, they're about taking a pause, just a moment to check in with yourself, to see how you're feeling. Are you overwhelmed, distracted, stressed? By noticing those states, you can actually take steps to bring yourself back to a place of focus and calm. And then metta, that cultivates compassion for yourself and for others. And this can have a huge impact on your relationships, how you lead, and your overall well-being. By wishing happiness and well-being for others, you actually create a more positive, supportive environment, and that benefits you too.
It's interesting because the text points out that applying these Buddhist principles doesn't mean abandoning ambition. It's about striving for excellence, but with integrity and balance. It uses this analogy of building a house, strong house, on a solid foundation of inner stability.
That's a really good analogy. It highlights how true success isn't just about what you achieve externally. It requires that strong inner core, self-awareness, ethical behavior, that emotional resilience. And those are the qualities that let you handle those challenges, maintain your integrity, and ultimately find lasting fulfillment in whatever you do.
So as we're wrapping up this part, the key questions are really about looking at how you're using your energy. How are you responding to change? How can you be more mindful in your everyday life so that your actions are really aligned with your values?
Exactly. It's about being conscious and intentional in how you live and work. It's recognizing that what's going on inside of you, it has a big impact on what happens externally. And that analogy of the river flowing towards its destination, it's a good reminder to trust in your efforts, especially when those efforts are guided by wisdom and intention.
That leads us to the final part of our deep dive here, the art of letting go. And the imagery used here is really vivid. It talks about a vast canyon, right, and a river, like carving its way through the rock. And it asks this question, is success about holding on, or is it about flowing? And it's really interesting because it kind of challenges that typical go-getter mentality.
Yeah, what's really powerful about this section is that it challenges a lot of what we've been taught about ambition and achievement. You know, we live in a world that says success is about accumulating, about controlling. So the idea of letting go, it can seem a little strange.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about that central concept here, non-attachment.
Yeah.
It's important to understand that this doesn't mean being apathetic or indifferent, right?
Exactly. Non-attachment, in the Buddhist sense, it's about freeing yourself from the suffering that comes with clinging tightly to expectations and desires. It's about recognizing that life is unpredictable. And instead of resisting that, you learn to cultivate a flexibility, a resilience that allows you to flow with change. You know, when you're so attached to a specific outcome, you set yourself up for disappointment. Non-attachment, it gives you a way to navigate those uncertainties with more ease, more peace of mind.
The text talks about Mark Benioff and his concept of beginner's mind, which is, another idea rooted in Zen principles. It's pretty fascinating how his non-attachment to conventional ways of doing things in CRM actually helped contribute to Salesforce's success.
What's interesting about Benioff is that he was willing to come into the industry with fresh eyes. He wasn't weighed down by all the traditional assumptions, so he could see possibilities that other people missed. And his focus, it wasn't just on profit. He wanted to genuinely help his customers, to make a positive impact. And this detachment from those ego-driven motives, it seems like it actually led to more innovation and ultimately more success.
So the text offers some really practical ways that people can apply this idea of letting go, like being open to alternative paths when it comes to their goals. So instead of being so rigid, it's about being flexible, adaptable.
Yeah, it's about holding your vision with an open hand, being willing to pivot when you need to, recognizing that the path to your goal, it might not always be a straight line. Sometimes those detours lead to something even better.
Right. And another key aspect is detaching from fear. And the text uses this really powerful image of fear being like a shadow. The more you resist it, the larger it grows. But if you acknowledge it, it shrinks.
That's such a great analogy. So often we try to push away our fears, try to suppress them, but that often just makes them stronger. But if you can, learn to observe your fears with curiosity, with compassion, maybe through meditation, you start to see them as just temporary states of mind. They don't define you. And by simply acknowledging them, accepting them, you can actually diminish their power over you.
The text also shares a personal anecdote, about being stuck in this perfectionism trap, and then remembering this quote from the Buddha about holding on to anger, like holding on to a hot coal. It really shows how clinging to things, even those things that we think are positive, like perfectionism, can actually be harmful.
That story really illustrates how letting go isn't about lowering your standards. It's about releasing that pressure, that anxiety that comes from those rigid expectations. It's about finding a healthier way to approach your work, your life, a way that allows for both excellence and peace of mind.
And then there's the Buddhist perspective on money, which is, something to think about. It's seen as energy and it needs to flow. Hoarding it, can create stagnation. But using it generously, using it with a purpose, that creates abundance.
It's a different way of looking at money, for sure. It goes beyond just accumulating it, and it really emphasizes how you use your resources, how you contribute to the well-being of others.
Right.
The example of Bill Gates moving into philanthropy, that really embodies this. It's the idea that true wealth isn't about how much you possess, it's about what you contribute.
Totally. And finally, the text talks about what it calls the ultimate letting go, detaching from fixed identities. The idea that holding on to labels and possessions, those things can actually hold you back.
This is a really deep concept. When you define yourself so narrowly, by your job title, your social status, your possessions, you can become really resistant to change. You limit your own growth. Look at Ariana Huffington and how her career has evolved. She was able to redefine herself, and embrace those new possibilities. It's like that analogy of water. Water takes the shape of whatever container it's in.
So what we're seeing in this last part is that true success, through this Buddhist lens, it's not a destination, right? It's a way of being. It's about having that quiet confidence, finding joy in helping others, and that inner peace that comes from trusting life's unfolding instead of trying to control everything.
Yeah, it's about shifting your focus, moving away from always seeking external validation and moving towards cultivating those qualities within yourself that bring lasting fulfillment. It's about flowing with life, letting go of what's no longer serving you, and embracing the potential that comes when you loosen your grip on those expectations and fixed identities.
So we're coming to the end of our deep dive here. And the text leaves us with some really powerful questions for reflection. Questions like, what am I holding on to that's no longer serving me? Or how can I see uncertainty as a source of strength instead of something to be afraid of? And how can I use my resources to make a positive impact on the world?
These are questions that you can keep coming back to. Personal transformation, like we've been talking about, it doesn't happen overnight, it's a journey. And being willing to even engage with these ideas, that's a huge step.
And on that note, I want to leave you with one final thought. Think about this. What if simply observing your thoughts and emotions without judging them is actually the most powerful tool you have? The most powerful tool for navigating life's complexities and finding both personal fulfillment and success in the world? What if the key is simply allowing yourself to be present, to be in this moment, and to trust in its wisdom?